He was ruthless, feared, and untouchable, the mafia boss whose name alone made rivals tremble. But even he had secrets. One evening, hidden in the shadows of the city, he followed her, a poor single mum moving through the crowded streets, unaware of the danger silently watching her. Every step she took, every gesture of kindness she performed, he observed in silence. What he saw next would shatter every expectation, a moment so extraordinary, so unthinkable, that even the most hardened heart could not ignore it. The mafia boss realized in that instant that power, fear, and respect could be challenged, and that the smallest acts of courage and humanity could change everything he thought he knew about the world and about himself. Clara Bennett had spent another long, exhausting day at her small corner store. Life as a single mum was a constant balancing act between bills, her son Marco, and the endless worry of keeping the store afloat. Yet she moved with quiet determination, arranging shelves, restocking products, and greeting her few regular customers with a warm smile. Her life was ordinary, mundane, and painfully predictable, but today it was about to collide with a world she could never have imagined. Somewhere across the city, Antonio Romano, the mafia boss, watched from the shadows. He was ruthless, feared, and untouchable, a man whose reputation alone could silence entire neighborhoods. Yet tonight, curiosity had driven him beyond the boundaries of his power. A single mother, small and seemingly insignificant, had drawn his attention, and he could not ignore the quiet courage she radiated in her ordinary life. He followed her carefully, keeping a discreet distance. Every movement was calculated. He knew the streets, the alleys, and the ways of those who might try to warn her. Clara had no idea that she was being watched, not by law enforcement, not by anyone who posed a known threat, but by a man whose very presence demanded absolute control and inspired fear in all who crossed him. Clara walked briskly, carrying Marco's small backpack as he clutched her hand. They moved through crowded streets, past vendors and pedestrians, unaware that the eyes tracking them from a black SUV belonged to one of the most feared men in the city. Antonio observed her interactions, noting her patience with customers, her careful attention to detail, and the gentle, reassuring way she treated her son. Each small action, each moment of empathy, struck him in a way he had not expected. Hours passed as he trailed her to a local park. Clara set Marco down near a playground, watching him swing and play while keeping a protective eye on him. Antonio remained hidden, observing quietly. He had followed many people in his life, yet none had affected him like this. There was something about her, her quiet strength, her courage, and her integrity, that made him pause and reconsider everything he thought he knew about power, loyalty, and respect. Clara noticed a small act of kindness that made Antonio's jaw tighten subtly. A young boy had dropped his ice cream, and Clara had immediately handed him a replacement, refusing any payment. It was simple, small, yet profound. For Antonio, who had built an empire on fear, intimidation, and respect commanded through authority, this display of selfless courage was astonishing. He had never seen strength like this, born not from violence or wealth, but from quiet morality and empathy. As evening approached, Clara led Marco back home, unaware that she was still being followed. Antonio watched her carefully, noting the lines of exhaustion on her face, the determination in her stride, and the love she carried in her eyes for her son. He realized that the unthinkable was unfolding, not through grand gestures, not through criminal action, but through the quiet heroism of a woman living an ordinary life under extraordinary pressures. Later that night, Clara returned to her small apartment, exhausted but proud. She tucked Marco into bed, whispering promises of better days and brighter mornings. The door closed, and she leaned against it, closing her eyes. Somewhere across the city, Antonio Romano remained in the shadows, reflecting on what he had witnessed. Her courage, humility, and perseverance had penetrated a fortress built of fear, power, and control. It was a reminder to him that true strength was not measured by intimidation, wealth, or ruthless action, but by the choices made in small, ordinary moments. The next morning, Clara opened her store and moved through her routine. She restocked shelves, swept the floor, and greeted her regulars with a smile. Yet an unseen presence lingered in the city. Antonio watched from afar, continuing his silent observation. Every small gesture she made, every act of kindness, every moment of courage, he noted them all. She had no idea that her life had intersected with a man who controlled entire networks of power, that her quiet bravery was now under scrutiny. By midweek, a subtle shift occurred in the city. Antonio made discreet inquiries about Clara, speaking to neighbors and observing her patterns. He discovered the sacrifices she made, the struggles she faced as a single mother, and the unwavering commitment she showed to her son. Every detail, every small act impressed him. The unthinkable was now clear. This woman, ordinary in appearance yet extraordinary in courage, had earned his attention in a way few ever had. As the week drew on, Clara's world remained unchanged on the surface. She worked, cared for her son, and maintained her daily routines. Yet unknowingly, she had become part of a narrative larger than herself, a story that intersected with power, fear, and influence in ways she could not comprehend. Antonio continued to follow, not to intimidate or harm, but to witness the integrity and bravery that had quietly defied his expectations. By the time Sunday returned, Clara had no idea that she was about to again cross paths with Antonio Romano. One simple act, one act of courage, kindness, and composure had placed her in a world she had never known. And Antonio, paralyzed by curiosity and admiration, would soon realize that the unthinkable was not only possible, it had already begun to unfold before his eyes. The city continued, oblivious to the silent drama. But for Clara and the unseen mafia boss trailing her, the story was only just beginning. The following week, Clara Bennett moved through her neighborhood with the same quiet determination she had every day. Her life as a single mother was far from easy, balancing her small corner store, caring for her son Marco, and managing the bills was a constant challenge. But she carried herself with grace, humility, and unwavering perseverance. She had no idea that someone was watching her every step. From a darkened sedan parked several blocks away, Antonio Romano, the mafia boss, observed her silently. Despite his reputation for fear and ruthlessness, there was something in Clara's ordinary life that drew him in, a subtle bravery, an unspoken courage, and a gentle moral clarity that fascinated him. He followed carefully, ensuring he remained unseen while noting every small act she performed, helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries, pausing to comfort a crying child, stopping to politely speak to a shopkeeper about a minor dispute. Each detail, mundane as it might have seemed, was a thread connecting her life to his gaze, a subtle measure of her integrity. Clara entered her small store and greeted her regular customers with a warm, practiced smile. Her hands moved efficiently, restocking shelves, counting inventory, and arranging fresh bread and produce with care. Marco, her young son, clung lightly to her skirt, his wide eyes scanning the store as he occasionally asked about the items she was arranging. Antonio watched through the rain-specked windows, his dark eyes tracking their every movement. He had seen countless people throughout his life, but Clara's quiet composure and unassuming bravery struck a chord he had never felt before. The day passed in a rhythm of small tasks, each one executed with careful attention, and Antonio remained hidden, following her discreetly. He observed how she patiently assisted her customers, how she handled minor mishaps with grace, and how she never flinched under the pressure of a busy day. Each moment revealed a facet of her strength, one that came not from physical power or influence, but from quiet integrity and courage. As evening approached, Clara closed her shop and walked down the street with Marco. She carried a small bag of groceries for a neighbor and waved goodbye to the local shopkeepers who had grown accustomed to her warmth. She had no awareness of Antonio Romano's presence, yet his attention remained unwavering. He noted how she moved through the streets, interacting with her community, teaching Marco subtle lessons about empathy, patience, and responsibility. Her life was ordinary, yet it contained extraordinary resilience. When they reached a park near their apartment, Clara sat Marco down on a bench. He played with a small toy car while she watched, exhausted but content. Antonio lingered at a distance, hidden in the shadows, observing the tenderness in their interaction. He was struck by the way she managed to instill confidence and security in her child, even amidst the hardships of daily life. There was a humanity in her actions that Antonio had rarely seen outside the confines of his controlled and ruthless world. The mafia boss's thoughts wandered. For years, he had relied on fear, power, and reputation to command loyalty and respect. But Clara's courage was different. It was silent, unnoticed by the world, yet it resonated deeply. She had no desire for recognition or influence. Her integrity was its own reward. Antonio realized that he had underestimated the power of small, selfless acts, how they could inspire, influence, and even unsettle a man like him. Later, Clara led Marco home, unaware of the observer following her. She prepared a simple dinner while Marco completed his homework. Her apartment was modest, yet filled with warmth and life. Antonio watched from a distance as she tucked Marco into bed, kissed him on the forehead, and whispered words of encouragement. Each gesture, simple and natural, carried weight. He understood why she had drawn his attention. Her courage, her resilience, and her unwavering moral compass were qualities he had long respected, yet rarely encountered in someone so ordinary. Over the next few days, Antonio continued to follow discreetly, noting patterns in her life, the way she treated her customers, the way she balanced motherhood and work, and how she remained steadfast in the face of exhaustion and uncertainty. He began to understand that this single mother was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. She was brave, selfless, and unflinching, qualities that had forced him to reevaluate his own assumptions about strength, loyalty, and influence. By Sunday, Antonio made a decision. He would reveal himself, but not to intimidate or assert power. He would observe her directly, see how she interacted with him when she understood who he was, and witness whether her courage and composure remained intact under true scrutiny. Clara opened her store that morning, preparing for another ordinary day. She had no idea that her life was about to intersect more directly with Antonio Romano's, a man whose shadow had been quietly tracking her for weeks. The threads of their lives, previously invisible, were now weaving together. She did not yet know that her bravery, kindness, and unwavering integrity would soon shock the mafia boss and alter the course of both their lives. The Sunday ritual had evolved. A single mum, acting with courage and empathy in her ordinary life, had already captured the attention of the city's most feared mafia boss, and now she was about to demonstrate, in a way he could never ignore, the full depth of her strength, resilience, and heart. Sunday had returned, and with it a sense of tension that Clara Bennett could almost feel in her bones. She had spent the week restocking her small store, attending to Marco, and running errands, but every action now seemed weighted with unseen eyes. She did not know it yet, but Antonio Romano, the mafia boss, had been observing her quietly for weeks, noting her courage, her kindness, and her unwavering composure in daily life. The black SUV glided to a stop outside the store, and Clara's pulse quickened. Today, she felt an inexplicable anticipation. Antonio stepped out, impeccably dressed as always, his eyes scanning the street and then the entrance. Clara took a deep breath and adjusted her apron, forcing a calm expression despite the flutter in her chest. He entered silently, commanding the room without a word. The patrons instinctively froze, and even the servers paused mid-step. Clara met his gaze steadily, aware that this was a test of more than just courage. It was a test of composure, integrity, and the quiet strength she had shown in her ordinary life. Antonio moved through the store, observing the layout, the stock, and every detail she had meticulously arranged. Then he turned fully toward her. "You continue to impress," he said, his voice low, deliberate, and calm. Not many would act with such patience and care in my presence, knowing what is at stake. Clara felt a mix of pride and fear. She realized that every small gesture, from the way she handled the bread to the care she showed Marco, was being observed and evaluated. A young mother entered with her child, asking for guidance with a difficult product. Clara calmly assisted, demonstrating patience, kindness, and attention to detail. Antonio's eyes lingered on her as she spoke, noting the sincerity in her tone and the ease with which she managed the interaction. Each act of care further revealed the unassuming strength she carried, a quality he had never expected to witness firsthand. After the mother left, Marco tugged at her skirt. Clara smiled down at him. "We're almost done, baby." Her calm demeanor belied the internal tension she felt under Antonio's scrutiny. He watched as she attended to the little tasks, her hands steady and movements deliberate. The subtle control, the quiet bravery, and the unwavering integrity all combined to form a picture of courage that was rare in the world he dominated. Antonio reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the counter toward Clara. She picked it up carefully. Inside, a brief note read, "Your patience, courage, and integrity are recognized." She felt a shiver run through her. This simple acknowledgement, from a man of unimaginable power, carried more weight than any reward or compliment she had ever received. For several moments, neither spoke. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken understanding. Antonio's gaze softened slightly as he studied her, noting the determination in her eyes, the subtle pride in her posture, and the unwavering patience she displayed even under the silent weight of his attention. Clara realized in that instant that he was not merely observing, he was impressed, affected, and challenged in ways she could not yet comprehend. Suddenly, a commotion outside drew his attention. A delivery truck had skidded on the wet pavement. Clara instinctively stepped forward to assist a nearby elderly customer, showing her characteristic attentiveness and calm under pressure. Antonio's eyes followed her every movement, witnessing the courage, quick thinking, and composure she displayed. The unthinkable, he realized, was not her ordinary appearance or humble status. It was the extraordinary strength and character that emerged naturally in her actions. When the incident resolved, he wheeled closer to the counter. "You have demonstrated that courage is not measured by power, wealth, or fear," he said. "It is measured by integrity, empathy, and the willingness to act when no one is watching." Clara's eyes widened, realizing the depth of his observation. Every small choice she had made, every act of patience, every careful gesture had not gone unnoticed. The patrons, servers, and other customers were oblivious to the significance, but for Clara, the weight of recognition was palpable. Antonio nodded once, signaling the completion of his assessment, and prepared to leave. Clara exhaled slowly, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and awe. As he exited, Marco tugged at her sleeve. "Mummy, did he like it?" he asked innocently. Clara knelt, ruffling his hair. "Yes, sweetie. He did, and we did the right thing." She realized that her courage, composure, and integrity, qualities that had guided her every day, had bridged two worlds, the ordinary life of a single mother and the ruthless power of the mafia boss. The Sunday ritual had transformed from a simple act into a defining moment. Clara Bennett had shown bravery, strength, and unwavering kindness, and Antonio Romano had witnessed it all. The unthinkable had happened. A single mum had impressed the city's most feared man, and her actions would ripple through his perception of loyalty, courage, and respect. Clara returned to her work with renewed resolve. Her life would continue as a single mum, but now her story was intertwined with power, observation, and recognition she had never imagined. And somewhere in the shadows, Antonio Romano knew he had encountered someone extraordinary, someone whose courage and heart could not be measured by wealth, reputation, or fear. The unthinkable had been witnessed. The story was only beginning. Sunday morning arrived with a crisp, quiet light. Clara Bennett prepared her small corner store as usual, arranging fresh bread and groceries, double-checking her receipts, and wiping the counters. There was an unusual tension in the air, a quiet anticipation she could feel but not explain. For weeks she had carried on her routine, unaware that someone dangerous and powerful had been observing her every move. Today, everything was about to culminate. At exactly 8:55 a.m., the sleek black SUV arrived, pulling to a stop in front of the shop. Clara's heart began to race. The mafia boss stepped out, impeccably dressed, a commanding presence even in his paralyzed form. Patrons froze, staff stopped mid-step, and the atmosphere thickened with expectation. Clara swallowed and held her posture steady, adjusting her apron and meeting his gaze directly. She could feel his scrutiny, the intensity of his observation, yet she did not falter. He entered the store silently, rolling forward in his wheelchair, his dark eyes scanning the room with the precision of a man accustomed to absolute control. Clara continued to arrange the items on the counter, her movements calm and deliberate, showing that she had nothing to hide. The envelope he had left last week was still in her pocket, a small talisman of recognition that had marked her bravery and composure. Antonio's assistants stayed at the edges of the room, tense and silent, but Antonio's focus remained solely on Clara. "You've maintained your courage," he said finally, his voice low and deliberate. "Not many would dare to act with such composure, knowing the world I inhabit." Clara felt her chest tighten, realizing that her actions, small acts of integrity and patience, were being evaluated not only for propriety, but for character. A young customer entered the store, seeking help with groceries she could not reach. Clara moved swiftly to assist, demonstrating patience and care. Antonio's gaze lingered on her, noting the unassuming courage she displayed. Even the mafia boss, feared by countless people across the city, was struck by the effortless bravery in her gestures. He realized that her strength was not in physical power or wealth, but in her integrity, empathy, and unshakable composure. Clara finished helping the customer and returned to the counter. She noticed the subtle shift in Antonio's expression, a rare softness in his otherwise impenetrable eyes. He reached forward, sliding a small envelope across the counter toward her. Clara picked it up carefully. Inside, a single line read, "Your courage, integrity, and humility are recognized." Her hands trembled as she absorbed the weight of the words. They were simple yet powerful, a validation from a man whose authority extended far beyond the city. Antonio leaned slightly closer. "You have reminded me," he said softly, "that true courage is measured not by wealth, fear, or dominance, but by integrity and compassion under pressure. Your actions today, and every day I have observed you, prove that bravery is not loud, it is quiet, deliberate, and selfless." Clara felt a wave of awe and relief wash over her. She realized that the simplest acts of kindness could reverberate into the most dangerous and powerful worlds. Ethan tugged at her sleeve, and she knelt to meet his eyes. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "We did the right thing." Marco nodded, sensing the significance without fully understanding it. Antonio straightened, signaling to his assistants. "You have earned my respect," he said, finally giving a nod that carried more authority than any weapon. "Continue your work, and never underestimate the power of integrity and courage in those who seem ordinary. Sometimes, the unlikeliest individuals can change the course of events far beyond their understanding." He wheeled back toward the door, pausing only to glance once more at Clara and Marco. His gaze held something rare, recognition, admiration, and a subtle acknowledgement that her bravery had left a mark. Without another word, he left, and the black SUV disappeared down the street. Clara stood behind the counter, the envelope still in her hand, absorbing the enormity of the moment. She had faced a world she barely understood and earned the acknowledgement of a man feared by thousands. Courage, composure, and integrity had bridged the gap between her modest life and a mafia empire, proving that even the smallest acts could ripple through the most powerful worlds. As evening settled over the city, Clara reflected on the lessons of the day. The Sunday ritual, once ordinary, had transformed into a defining moment. Her life, her small gestures of courage and kindness, had intersected with power, fear, and legacy in a way that would influence both her world and his. For Clara Bennett, single mum and quiet hero of her own life, the story was complete but unforgettable. The mafia boss had witnessed the unthinkable: courage, empathy, and integrity in a woman who appeared ordinary but possessed extraordinary strength. And in that moment, she had changed everything, not through power, wealth, or fear, but through the quiet force of her character. The unthinkable had been witnessed. The story had reached its conclusion. But Clara's courage would continue to echo far beyond the walls of her small store, leaving an indelible mark on the mafia empire she had touched with nothing more than her integrity, humility, and heart.